Chapter 1. The Town That Forgot How to Listen. The town of Hamelin was proud of its quiet. Not the peaceful kind, not the sort that came from understanding or rest, but the orderly quiet of routine. Doors opened when expected. Bells rang on schedule. Voices followed rules about when they should rise and when they should soften. It was a town that valued control more than harmony. In the early mornings, mist settled low along the cobbled streets, and the river moved through the town like a thought no one wished to finish. Shopkeepers lifted shutters. Bakers set loaves into ovens. Children were guided firmly by the shoulders toward lessons they did not choose. And everywhere, adults spoke over them. The children learned early that their voices did not travel far. Questions were answered with instructions. Curiosity was redirected. Complaints were dismissed as noise. Later, the adults would say, "Not now. Be still." Eventually, the children learned silence. Not the calm silence of contentment, but the practiced silence of those who know they are unheard. The town believed this was order. The town believed it was doing well. It was during one such morning, gray, unremarkable, and precisely on time, that the piper first arrived. No announcement marked his coming. No bells rang. No guards stopped him at the gate. He simply appeared at the edge of the square as though the fog itself had shaped him and decided to let him remain. He wore a long coat, dark and plain, its edges worn soft with age. His hat cast his face in shadow, though his posture was relaxed, almost patient. Slung across his back was an instrument unlike any the town had seen, slender, carved from pale wood, its surface etched with faint patterns that caught the light when he moved. The adults noticed him immediately. They always notice strangers. Their gazes flicked toward him and away again, cataloging, assessing. He did not look threatening. He did not look poor enough to be pitied, nor grand enough to be respected. He looked unnecessary. The piper stood still for a long moment, listening. The town was loud in its own way, the scrape of carts, the murmur of commerce, the constant low hum of instruction and correction. It was noise without music, motion without rhythm. The piper exhaled slowly. Then he lifted the instrument to his lips. The sound that emerged was not loud. It did not announce itself. It slipped into the air like breath. At first, no one noticed. The adults continued their business. Coins exchanged hands. Doors opened and closed. Orders were given and followed. But the children paused. One by one, they felt it, a vibration just beneath the noise of the town. A tone that did not demand attention, but offered something rarer. The music did not speak to obedience. It did not instruct or correct. It did not rush. It simply waited. A boy stacking crates near his father stopped and tilted his head. A girl sweeping the steps outside a schoolhouse slowed her movements. A group of children passing through the square drifted closer together, their steps unconsciously syncing to a rhythm no one else seemed to hear. The piper played on. The melody wound gently through the square, weaving between voices and footsteps, slipping past rules and expectations. It did not grow louder. It grew clearer. The adults frowned. "What is that sound?" someone muttered. "It's distracting," said another. Someone should tell him to stop. But none of them moved. They could hear the music, yes, but it did not speak to them. It passed through their awareness without catching, like a thought dismissed too quickly to examine. The children, however, were listening. For the first time, something was listening to them. The piper's eyes lifted slightly beneath the brim of his hat. He watched the children with quiet attentiveness, adjusting his tune in subtle ways. A softer note here, a slower rhythm there, as though responding to something only he could sense. He did not smile. He did not beckon. He did not need to. By the time the town council gathered to complain, the music had already taken root. "It's disruptive," the mayor said, pounding the table. "This town runs on order." "People are pausing," said a councilman. "Lingering." "And the children," another added. "They're distracted." The mayor stood abruptly. "I'll speak to him myself." He marched into the square, his voice already sharpened with authority. "You there?" he called. "You're disturbing the peace." The piper lowered his instrument. Instantly the air felt thinner. Several children shifted uneasily, as though something essential had been removed. "I'm only playing," the piper said calmly. "You're interfering," the mayor snapped. "This town has rules." The piper inclined his head slightly. "I hear them." "Then you'll stop." The piper considered this. "For now," he said. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the fog as quietly as he had arrived. The adults exhaled in relief. "See," the mayor said. "Handled." The town returned to its routines. But something had changed. That evening, children lay awake longer than usual, staring at ceilings, listening for a sound they could no longer hear. The quiet felt heavier now, less complete. Some of them hummed softly, unsure where the melody had come from. Others cried without knowing why. Far beyond the town gates, the piper stood at the edge of the hills and listened to the silence he had left behind. He knew what would come next. Music, once heard, could not be unheard, and a town that had forgotten how to listen was about to learn the cost of ignoring the wrong voices. The piper lifted his instrument once more, and the night leaned closer. Chapter 2: The Children Who Heard First. The next morning, the town woke with a faint sense of unease. Nothing was wrong, not in any way that could be named. The bells rang on time. The bakers' ovens warmed as they always had. The river moved with its patient familiarity. Yet something in the air felt unsettled, as if the day had arrived slightly misaligned with itself. The adults noticed this only as irritation. The children noticed it as absence. They felt it in the space where the music had been. A boy named Lucas lingered by his window longer than usual, his lessons forgotten on the table behind him. He pressed his forehead to the cold glass, listening. The town sounded the same: carts, voices, footsteps, but underneath it all was a hollow quiet that made his chest ache. Across the street, Greta swept the stoop outside her mother's shop. Her broom moved slower than it should have. Each scrape against stone felt too loud, too sharp. She paused, resting her hands on the handle, her head tilted slightly, waiting for something she could not explain. At the schoolhouse, children sat in neat rows while the teacher spoke, her voice steady and practiced. Chalk tapped against slate. Instructions filled the room. But the children's attention drifted. Not restlessly, not rebelliously, longingly. The music had not told them to do anything. It had simply made space for them to feel. And now that space was gone. By midday, the children began to find one another without planning to. They gathered at the edges of lessons, at the corners of streets, beneath the bare-limbed trees near the riverbank. They did not speak much at first. Words felt unnecessary, almost too blunt. Instead, they listened together. "Do you hear it?" Lucas asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Greta shook her head. "Not anymore." "I can still feel where it was," said a smaller boy, tracing a slow circle in the air with his finger. Others nodded. They did not know how to explain it, only that the world had briefly softened, and now it had hardened again. That afternoon, as shadows lengthened and the town's attention turned inward toward meals and schedules, the piper returned. This time, he did not stand in the square. He stood just beyond it, near the narrow path that led toward the hills. He raised his instrument. The first note drifted through the air like a remembered dream. The children froze. They felt it immediately, a warmth behind the ribs, a loosening behind the eyes. The melody was gentler than before, slower, shaped by the distance between listener and source. One by one, children began to move. Not quickly, not suddenly, as though responding to a tide they trusted. They slipped from doorways, stepped away from chores, paused at thresholds and chose, without discussion, to cross them. The adults did not notice at first. They rarely did. The piper played on, his tune winding softly through the streets, slipping beneath doors and through open windows. It did not demand obedience. It offered permission. Permission to step away. Permission to be quiet without being corrected. Permission to follow something that did not explain itself. Children gathered along the path, their movements unhurried, their faces calm. The piper walked slowly ahead of them, not leading so much as allowing them to follow. He did not look back. He did not need to. By the time the adults realized what was happening, the children were already gone from the square. Shouts rose. Where are they going? Who let them leave? Stop them. But the music dulled the edges of panic, smoothing urgency into confusion. The piper's melody did not block sound. It redirected attention. Orders lost their sharpness. Commands scattered before they could land. A few adults followed as far as the edge of the town. Then they stopped. The hills beyond felt unfamiliar. The path narrowed. The air grew quieter. This is far enough, someone muttered. They'll come back, said another. They always do. And so the adults turned around. The children did not. The path wound gently upward, the town's noise fading behind them. The piper's music grew softer, more spacious, as though it were no longer competing with anything. Some of the children began to hum. Others closed their eyes as they walked, trusting the rhythm beneath their feet. No one spoke of home. No one asked where they were going. They felt, for the first time, what it meant to be unhurried. As dusk approached, the piper led them to a wide clearing near the base of the hills. The ground was soft with fallen leaves and frost. The air smelled of earth and cold stone. He lowered his instrument. The silence that followed was not empty. It was complete. The children settled naturally, some sitting, some standing, some lying back to watch the sky darken. No one fidgeted. No one asked what came next. The piper spoke then, not loudly, not commandingly, but as one might speak to a room already listening. You hear what others do not, he said. The children did not answer, but they understood. You noticed what was missing, he continued. That matters. A girl raised her hand slowly. Will we have to go back? The piper met her gaze. Only if you wish to. The answer settled over them like a blanket. They stayed until night deepened and stars emerged, one by one, above the hills. Eventually, the piper lifted his instrument again, and the music returned. Quieter now, more distant, guiding rather than gathering. The children rose and followed, deeper into the dark. Back in the town, parents began to count heads. Unease sharpened into alarm. But it was already too late to simply call the children home. They had heard something no command could undo. And the piper, walking steadily ahead beneath the open sky, knew this was only the beginning. The music had been heard. The choice had been made. And the town, still convinced it ruled by order alone, had not yet realized what it had lost by refusing to listen. Chapter 3: The Doors That Stayed Closed. By the time night fully settled over Hamelin, the town had realized something was wrong. Not all at once. At first, it was small disruptions. A mother calling a name too many times before stopping, confused. A teacher counting heads twice, then a third time, her voice thinning. A baker noticing that the usual group of children had not lingered near his window at dusk. Individually, these moments meant little. Together, they formed a pattern the town had no language for. Lanterns were lit earlier than usual. Doors opened and shut with sharper movements. Voices rose, not yet in panic, but in insistence, as though speaking louder might correct whatever had gone astray. "Have you seen my son? She was just here. They can't have gone far." The mayor was summoned again to the square, his cloak thrown hastily over his shoulders. He listened as reports arrived from every corner of the town. Too many names. Too many absences. "They've wandered," he said firmly, though his eyes darted toward the darkened streets. "Children do that. They'll return." But the words rang hollow, even to him. The square felt different now, wider, emptier. The echoes lingered too long after footsteps passed. The fountain murmured to itself, indifferent. And somewhere beyond the gates, the music continued. Not loudly, not clearly, but enough. A few adults heard it then, a distant tone carried on the wind, threading through the night like a half-remembered melody. It stirred something uncomfortable in their chests. They stopped walking. They frowned. Then they shook their heads and continued on, unwilling to examine the sensation too closely. Music was dangerous when it asked questions. Better to focus on action. Search parties formed. Men with lanterns moved through the streets, calling names, peering into alleyways and courtyards. They knocked on doors, spoke urgently, demanded answers. The town responded as it always had, with structure. Paths were assigned. Areas were covered. Instructions were repeated. But the search avoided the hills. No one said this aloud. The path leading out of town had always been there, narrow and unremarkable. Yet something about it discouraged pursuit. The darkness beyond felt deeper, less shaped. Sounds seemed to behave differently there. The adults told themselves it was foolish to go farther. "We'll wait until morning." They couldn't have gone far. It's too dangerous at night. And so, one by one, the lanterns turned back. Doors closed. Locks slid into place. Inside their homes, the adults waited. They waited with the kind of stillness that pretends to be patience but is, in truth, avoidance. They told themselves the children would return when they were cold or hungry, that the world beyond the town would remind them where they belonged. They did not consider that the children might have already found something warmer. Beyond the hills, the children rested. They had walked for a long time, but no one complained. The music shaped their pace, easing them forward without urgency. When they stopped, it felt natural, not like exhaustion, but like arrival. They gathered in a shallow valley where the wind softened and the stars felt closer. The piper played no more now. He sat among them, his instrument resting across his knees, his presence steady and unintrusive. Some of the children slept. Others spoke quietly, voices low and unafraid. "It's quieter here," Greta said, her eyes on the sky. "It feels like we're allowed to be," Lucas replied. A younger child asked, "Will they come looking for us?" The piper did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was calm. "They will look," he said, "but they will not follow." The children absorbed this without protest. They understood more than the adults realized. They had lived in a town where listening was conditional, where attention came with rules attached. They knew the limits of concern. "What happens now?" someone asked. The piper smiled faintly, not kindly, not cruelly, simply knowingly. "Now," he said, "you learn how far your feet can carry you." Morning arrived slowly. Mist clung to the ground, and frost traced delicate patterns across fallen leaves. The children woke rested, surprised by the absence of bells or voices demanding they rise. No one told them where to stand. No one corrected how they moved. They ate what the piper provided, simple food shared evenly, and followed when he rose and walked on. The path widened as the land opened into rolling terrain. Occasionally, distant villages appeared at the edges of their vision, smoke rising, roofs glinting faintly in the light. They did not stop. The piper did not direct them toward these places. "They don't listen either," he said quietly when asked. The children did not argue. Back in Hamelin, the morning brought clarity and fear. The mayor stood before the council, his face pale. "They didn't return," he said. A murmur rippled through the room. "We must go farther," someone insisted. "But where?" another asked. "There are too many paths." "And the hills," a third voice trailed off. The mayor hesitated. The truth pressed close, unwelcome and sharp. They had never learned how to follow. They had only learned how to command. By the time the adults ventured beyond the gates, the music had faded too far to trace. The paths split and curved, offering no clear direction. They stood there, lanterns trembling, uncertain. For the first time, the town faced a silence it could not organize. And far beyond their reach, the children walked on, not stolen, not forced, simply choosing not to return to doors that had closed far too easily behind them. Chapter 4. The Road Beyond the Hill. The children walked for days. Not in a straight line, and not with any sense of urgency. The piper did not lead them along roads meant for travel. Instead, he followed the quiet curves of the land, paths shaped by animals, by water, by time itself. Places where feet had passed gently enough to leave only memory behind. The farther they went, the more the world seemed to loosen. Villages appeared and vanished at the edges of sight. Sometimes smoke curled from chimneys in the distance, and the children would slow, watching the thin gray lines rise and dissolve into the sky. Other times they passed abandoned cottages, their doors hanging open, their hearths cold, as though people had left in a hurry long ago. "Did they leave because of you?" a boy asked one evening as they rested beside a stream. The piper shook his head. "They left because no one listened to them either." The children accepted this without surprise. They had begun to understand something the town never had, that leaving was not always about escape. Sometimes it was about preservation. At night, the piper played softly. Not to guide them forward, but to settle them where they were. The music wrapped the clearing in a gentle hush, smoothing the sharp edges of thought, easing the ache of memory without erasing it. Some children dreamed of their homes, kitchens, stairwells, familiar corners, but the dreams felt distant now, as though viewed through fogged glass. Others dreamed of nothing at all. And in that emptiness they rested. The piper watched them carefully. He did not count them. He did not name them. He did not claim them as his own. He simply made space. One evening, as the land rose into a long, winding hill, the children hesitated. From the crest, they could see far, farther than they ever had before. The town of Hamelin was no longer visible, swallowed by distance and terrain. Beyond the hill stretched valleys and forests layered into the horizon, each one softer than the last. "This is where the road ends," Greta said quietly. "No," the piper replied. "This is where it stops pretending to be one." He stepped forward, and the children followed. As they descended the far side of the hill, the air changed. It grew quieter still, not empty, but receptive. Sounds carried differently. Footsteps seemed to settle into the earth rather than bounce away. Here, there were no fences, no markers, no signs telling them who belonged where. The piper slowed, then stopped. "This is as far as I go," he said. The children froze. "What do you mean?" Lucas asked, his voice unsteady for the first time. The piper turned to face them fully. His eyes were calm, reflective, not sad, but resolved. "You can keep walking," he said. "Or you can stay. Or you can turn back." A hush fell over the group. "You said they wouldn't listen," a girl whispered. "What if we go back anyway?" The piper nodded. "Then you'll learn whether they have." Silence stretched long and wide. Some children stepped closer together. Others stared out at the open land ahead, their faces thoughtful, not afraid. "You won't make us choose?" someone asked. The piper smiled faintly. "That was never my role." Slowly, deliberately, the children began to separate. A small group turned back toward the hill, their steps tentative but determined. They carried no anger, no defiance, only curiosity. A need to know. Another group moved forward, drawn by the quiet promise of a place where voices were not managed, only heard. And some remained where they were, sitting in the grass, content to rest in the uncertainty. The piper watched them all. When the last decision had been made, when no one remained frozen between directions, he lifted his instrument one final time. He played a single, soft note. It did not pull. It did not guide. It simply acknowledged. Then he turned and walked away, his figure dissolving into the folds of the land as gently as he had arrived. Back in Hamelin, the doors remained closed. Parents sat at tables long after meals had gone cold. The mayor stared at maps that no longer made sense. The town listened now, desperately, but it was listening too late and in all the wrong directions. When the first child returned days later, alone and quiet, the town rushed forward with questions and apologies and promises. The child listened, then said calmly, "You didn't hear us before," and walked past them. Others returned too, one by one, carrying new stillness in their posture, new confidence in their silence. Some spoke, some did not, and some never came back at all. The town changed. Not quickly, not cleanly, but the sound of the piper's music lingered in its streets long after it had faded from the air, a reminder that listening was not something that could be demanded. It had to be chosen. And beyond the hill, the road continued, open, quiet, and waiting for anyone who learned how to hear it. Chapter 5. The Silence the Town Inherited. Hamelin learned silence slowly. At first, it came as shock, the stunned quiet of a place that had shouted for answers and received none. Bells rang less often. Markets opened later. Conversations stalled halfway through sentences, as though the words themselves were uncertain they still belonged. The town had been built on noise that passed for order. Now that noise no longer worked. Parents waited by windows long after dusk, watching the road beyond the hill with an attention they had never given it before. Some held doors open far into the night, lanterns burning low, hoping light alone might serve as an apology. It did not. The children who returned did so without ceremony. They came back changed, not wounded, not wild, but settled. Their steps were steadier. Their eyes lingered longer on things they had once ignored. They spoke when they wished and fell silent without explanation. Adults found this unsettling. "What happened out there?" they asked again and again. The children did not rush to answer. Some said, "We walked." Others said, "We listened." A few said nothing at all. The town tried to recover its old rhythms. Lessons resumed. Chores were assigned. Rules were repeated more firmly, as though volume might restore authority. But the children no longer responded the same way. They did not rebel. They did not obey. They considered. That hesitation, that moment of quiet evaluation, changed everything. Greta returned on the 5th day. Her mother ran to her, tears spilling freely, words tumbling over one another in relief and regret. Greta listened patiently, then held up a hand. "Please," she said softly, "one at a time." Her mother froze. Greta smiled, not unkindly, and waited. The adults noticed then that the children were setting the pace of conversations, that they were no longer rushing to fill silence or soften discomfort. They allowed quiet to exist. This frightened the town more than the piper ever had. The mayor convened a council. "We must restore order," he insisted, his voice echoing hollowly in the chamber. "The children are different." "They're calmer," someone offered. "They're distant," said another. "They're listening," a third murmured. The mayor slammed his hand on the table. "Exactly." Beyond the walls, those who had not returned built lives that did not resemble escape. They settled near water and open land, forming small communities shaped by necessity rather than instruction. Decisions were made slowly. Words were weighed. Silence was treated as information rather than absence. Sometimes travelers passed through and stayed. Sometimes children from other towns arrived, drawn by something they could not name. The piper did not return. He was not needed anymore. In Hamelin, the memory of music faded, but its effect remained. A low, constant awareness that the town had failed to hear something important when it mattered most. The river flowed on. The bells rang, though less insistently. And the children, whether they stayed or left, carried with them a knowledge that could not be unlearned. That listening was not the same as waiting your turn to speak. That silence could be a gift, and that some doors, once closed, could only be reopened by changing what stood behind them. The town never spoke of the piper again. But on certain nights, when the wind moved just right through the streets and the hills beyond the gates lay quiet and dark, someone would pause, mid-step, mid-thought, and listen. And for a moment, the town would remember what it had forgotten. Chapter 6: The Night the Music Didn't Stop. Years passed. Not in the clean, comforting way towns like to imagine time passing, neatly stacked seasons, predictable routines, the steady assurance that everything returns to normal if you wait long enough. In Hamelin, time moved differently after the piper. It moved with a hesitation. The town still woke to morning light and went to sleep under nightfall, but the spaces between those moments felt altered. People spoke more carefully. They listened more often, sometimes sincerely, sometimes out of fear that silence might again become a doorway. The river still cut through the town, patient and indifferent, and the hills still rose beyond the gates, unchanged in their quiet distance. Yet the town no longer looked toward them with the same certainty. The hill had become a boundary the town did not understand. It was not fenced, not guarded, not forbidden. It simply carried memory. Children grew into adults, and adults grew older. Some of the children who returned stayed and built lives within Hamelin's walls, but they never became what the town expected. They did not seek positions for the sake of praise. They did not rush to fill silence with noise. They raised their own children differently. Not dramatically, not rebelliously, quietly. They asked their children what they thought before telling them what to do. They let them pause. They let them feel uncertain without labeling it disobedience. Small changes. But small changes shape entire generations. And some of the children who had left never returned at all. The town spoke of them less and less over the years, not because they were forgotten, but because saying their names felt like admitting the town had not been enough to hold them. Eventually, the missing became a kind of quiet bruise the town learned to live with. Yet the night never fully returned to silence. Even when no sound could be heard, the town carried the memory of music the way a body carries the memory of warmth long after the fire dies. People would pause in the middle of ordinary moments, tying a shoe, sweeping a step, closing a door, and feel a faint pressure behind their ribs, as though something were listening back. They called it imagination. They called it guilt. They called it nothing at all. But it remained. On the 10th anniversary of the night the children left, the mayor, a different mayor now, older, weary, climbed the hill beyond the gates alone. He did not announce this journey. He did not bring guards or banners. He carried no lantern, no map, no official record of his intentions. He carried only a heavy understanding that he did not deserve comfort. The path upward was narrow. Grass and frost softened the ground. The wind, higher up, was sharper and cleaner, stripped of chimney smoke and marketplace noise. At the crest, the mayor stopped. He looked out over the land beyond. It did not look like tragedy. It looked like possibility. Valleys lay open and wide. A thin ribbon of smoke rose far in the distance from somewhere the town had never marked on any map. The sky felt immense, the stars sharper than the ones that hung above the town streets. He stood there for a long time, hands trembling slightly, not from cold but from the unfamiliar sensation of being small without being threatened. And then, at last, he heard it. Not a melody, not a tune. A single tone, low and soft, carried on the wind as though the night itself had inhaled and decided to hum. The mayor's breath caught. He did not shout. He did not call out. He did not demand answers. For the first time in his life, he did the one thing Hamelin had never truly practiced. He listened without trying to control what he heard. The tone faded. He remained. Minutes passed, then more. And slowly, as though responding to his stillness, the sound returned, faint, careful, almost shy. Not calling him forward, not pulling him away, simply acknowledging that someone had finally met the music with the respect it had always asked for. The mayor sat down on the cold grass. He closed his eyes. In the dark behind his eyelids, memories rose, children's voices cut short, questions answered with commands, laughter silenced for the sake of order. He felt, in that quiet, how many small moments had formed the foundation for a single night of leaving. He began to weep. Not loudly, not theatrically, just enough for the wind to take his breath and carry it away. When he opened his eyes again, he saw someone standing a short distance away. A figure in a long coat, dark and plain, edges worn soft with time. The piper. He stood as though he had always been there, as though the hill had simply decided to reveal him. The mayor could not speak. The piper did not greet him. He did not accuse him. He only watched, calm, patient, unreadable. The mayor swallowed hard. "Are they alive?" he whispered. The piper considered him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. The mayor's shoulders sagged with relief so sudden it looked almost like weakness. "Do they hate us?" he asked, voice breaking. The piper's expression did not change, but the air around them felt gentler, as if the night itself had softened. "They don't think of you as much as you think they do," the piper said quietly. The words landed like truth does, without cruelty, without comfort. The mayor lowered his head. "Then why do I still hear it?" he asked. "Why does the town still feel haunted?" The piper lifted his instrument slowly, not to play, but to rest it against his shoulder like a familiar weight. "Because the music didn't take them," he said. "It revealed them." The mayor looked up, eyes wet. "And what did it reveal?" he asked. The piper's gaze drifted toward the town below, lights flickering faintly through the mist. "It revealed who was listening," he said. A long silence followed. The mayor's voice came smaller. "Can you forgive us?" The piper's eyes returned to him. "I'm not the one you wronged," he said. The mayor flinched as if struck. Then, slowly he nodded. Because he understood. Forgiveness would not come from the sky or from the hills or from the piper. It would come, if it came at all, from the people the town had learned to overlook. The piper raised the instrument to his lips. The mayor froze. The first note came soft and low, weaving through the night like a thread pulled from an old seam. It did not summon. It did not command. It did not even invite. It simply existed. The mayor listened. And as he listened, he felt something shift in him. Not absolution, not comfort, but orientation. A quiet understanding of what the town had lost, and what it might still become if it learned to listen without fear. The piper lowered the instrument. The sound lingered longer than it should have, as though the hill held it carefully. Then the piper stepped back, his figure fading into the dark like mist dissolving into colder air. He was gone. The mayor remained for a long time, watching the valley beyond, listening to the wind, letting the silence speak without trying to interrupt it. When he finally rose and walked back down the hill, he did not feel like a hero. He felt like a person returning with an honest burden. He returned to the town and did something the mayors before him would never have done. He called no meeting. He issued no orders. He simply opened the doors of the hall, lit a single candle, and sat inside without speaking. One by one, people came. Not because they were summoned, because they noticed. And they sat. In silence. Together. At first it was uncomfortable. Then it became something else. A shared space where no one rushed to be right, where no one competed to be heard, where the pauses between thoughts were allowed to stretch into meaning. And slowly, so slowly it almost seemed like nothing was happening, Hamelin began to change. Not into a perfect town. Not into a redeemed town. Into a listening town. Some nights, children would climb the hill beyond the gates and sit in the grass, staring at the open land on the other side. They would hear nothing most of the time. But sometimes, when the wind moved just right, they would catch a tone so faint it felt more like feeling than sound. And they would smile, not because they understood it, but because they recognized what it meant. That the world was larger than rules. That silence was not emptiness. And that music, once it taught you how to listen, never truly stopped. Not in the hills. Not in the heart. Not in the quiet places where a person finally hears themselves and decides to keep walking.